Down pan red wine is my drink. Imagine that warm bubbles flowing.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godley, this is the voice of Johnson County. Joco Community Radio.
Have you ever met a single person in your life that enjoys paying taxes? No one does. If you can't sleep at night because you have a huge problem with the IRS, I've got some free advice for you. This service is strictly limited to individuals that owe the IRS $10,000 or more in back taxes. And if you qualify, we can guarantee that you won't be writing a big fat check to the IRS, or our services cost you nothing. The first 100 people that call today will get a free tax consultation worth $500. Stop worrying about your IRS problem. We can help you, we promise. Call the tax doctor right now. I mean right now to learn more.
800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. 800-240-4587. That's 800-240-4587.
Why have thousands of aspiring authors teamed up with Christian Faith Publishing to publish their book? Because Christian Faith Publishing is an author-friendly publisher who understands that your labor is more than just a book. We provide authors freedom and flexibility throughout the publishing process, professional book editing, award-winning design, and some of the highest royalty structures in the publishing industry. And as always, you will retain 100% of the rights to your book.
I was looking to find a company that I could trust, one that assisted in the editing process completely.
The most important qualities that I was looking for was a publisher who was honest and upfront, no hidden costs or fees, and owning the rights to my own work.
Christian Faith Publishing will publish, market, and sell your books in all major bookstores, online booksellers, as well as specialty Christian bookstores. Call for your free author submission kit.
800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. 800-978-4812. That's 800-978-4812.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
Here's important new information from the Diabetes Solution Center for you, a family member, or a loved one suffering with diabetes. If you have lost your provider, or if you need a provider for diabetic supplies, you may qualify to receive your diabetic testing supplies now with little or no out-of-pocket cost, regardless of your age. All you need is Medicare or private insurance to be potentially eligible. Call the Diabetes Solution Center right now for details. Just takes a couple of minutes. Our friendly, knowledgeable agents will give you free, no-obligation information, handle all the insurance paperwork, and make sure your supplies are delivered directly to your door for free.
Call U.S. Medical Supply 24 hours a day. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. 800-597-9323. Call right now. 800-597-9323.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back to Let Freedom Ring. I'm your host, Jake Wernette. We are blessed to be back with all of you this wonderful afternoon. We thank you for tuning back in. Let's see if we can get everything automated up here. We are here today to discuss a few topics that might be concerning to Texas citizens and Texas people alike, regardless of whether you live in Johnson County, Tarrant County, or any one of these counties. There is a few, and I say a few, there's about 14 new amendments to the Texas Constitution that we have seen here recently, a few of them having to do with education, a few having to do with tax breaks. I figured today, matter of fact, we were presented this morning with at the men's breakfast that Mick and I attend. Matthew Lucci, the Republican 24-year-old, astounding, brilliant mind running for Congress in the 25th district here, running on new ideas, running on traditional values, showing that we as Americans can have a young perspective and be traditional at the same time. When we look at these amendments, people more than likely not are going to vote 75% of the time to pass these things through without even a moderate consideration or criticism to what is actually going on with these amendments.
I want to say the Texas Constitution has been amended 517 times since 1876.
So we're looking at an average of maybe 5 to 7 times every year for the last 100 years is how much we've amended this thing.
Let me punch that into a calculator because I actually kind of want to know that. Why do we need so many? How many does the federal Constitution have?
27.
Okay.
So, and that's after 247 odd years.
Yeah, your math checks out there.
And this is from personal experience, I had voted in a constitutional amendment election when I first started college as a political science major, and had noticed one of them was demanding that appointments to the Supreme Court of the state of Texas have to have at least 9 years of litigation experience, whether that be as a lawyer, as a judge, as an attorney. And I went to school the next day. I'm telling you, I am prone to overthinking things, but that's good when it comes to government because we need people that overthink and have, all these hypothetical situations going on before they make a decision. I really should have thought about it before I went and voted in this constitutional amendment election. But what I had thought about was, okay, so just because you have experience does not delegate that you have the understanding or the compassion or the determination to do the right thing in that position. So I went back to school. I told my professor, I said, look, man, I said, I really regret voting on that whole 9-year requirement thing. And even though it passed, he said, well, you're in luck because I canceled out your vote. And I thought about that. And I thought next time these things happen, we have to focus on what's going on as citizens. We have to know what our Constitution is being amended to. We have to know what is going to ultimately, sometimes we look at these amendments and say, well, tax breaks for preschools, tax breaks for family farms. It looks like a great job. But when you get right down to it in the next 10, 20 years, we can see the government putting stipulations on those tax breaks and saying unless you're homeschooling or your daycare is, God forbid, we get a progressive Marxist in the governor's office here in 25 years. It might not be now, it might not be in 10 years, but God forbid we have somebody awful that gets into the governor's job and says,
a rhino.
You remember those tax breaks we gave to your kids preschool? Well, unless they teach their, 8 religion or not 8 religions, 8 genders, 8 sexes, then your preschool is not getting a tax break. Or they could tell family farms, unless you are planting soybeans or Soylent Green, then we are not going to be giving you tax breaks.
It's funny you mentioned that. If you get really into the tax code, you can see the government trying to encourage certain types of behavior through the tax code. They give out, they give tax breaks for doing certain things. Because right now, you get a bunch of tax breaks for doing environmental stuff, like solar panels.
And that's how they're forwarding that whole Green New Deal and everything. This big spending agenda,
the wet blanket on our economy.
So, without further ado, Mick and I are going to delve right into this. There's so many things here. There's 14 amendments. We're going to try and at least get through the first 6 and then see what we have time to get through. If you out there in the audience have a specific one that you have questions about, you want our input on, you want our opinions, or you want to call in about this is going to be a call-in show because what we're discussing here, we're going to be getting into what Reuters later on had called a conspiracy. Of course, they didn't say that word, but no evidence, newly proposed ICE secure docket program cards. This was August 2022. Now guess what's come out in the news today. So it's still fairly recent, and these things have a lot of effects on us as citizens that we can't foresee even in these elections. So House Resolution 126 or House Joint Resolution 26, Proposition number 1 or Amendment 1, what they're proposing, a constitutional amendment to protect a person's right to engage in generally accepted farm, ranch, timber production, horticulture. We're going to skip down a few lines. If you can look these up yourselves and follow along if you want. It's just titled Explanatory Statements for the November 7th, 2023 Constitutional Amendment Election for the state of Texas. The proposed amendment would not affect the authority of the legislature to authorize the regulation of these practices by 1, a state agency or political subdivision as necessary to protect the public health and safety from imminent danger, 2, a state agency to prevent a danger to a animal health or crop production, a state agency or political subdivision to preserve or conserve natural resources or the state under the Texas Constitution. Additionally, the proposed amendment would not affect the legislature's authority to authorize the use or acquisition of property for a public use, including the development of natural resources under the Texas Constitution. So we're going to open up the floor here now. I know that sounds very professional, like we're sitting right here on the Texas House floor debating this as citizens. And I hope this gets beamed down to Austin because those guys could use a good whack in the face or two. And I don't mean violently. I mean, these guys are probably financed by some of the greatest masterminds on the face of the earth. And I'm sure Dole Fruit or somebody is really going to appreciate paying somebody to get this put through. So I'm kind of mixed on this. And before I go to Mick, I'm just going to kind of give my duality of man concept on this here. I am pro this amendment for one reason, is if it protects a person's right to farm, I'm all for it. The reason our country is in the shape it is because we have lacked the ability to operate family farms in this country. We are seeing it go to monopolies. We're seeing it go to these bureaucratic corporations. And I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not it's not capitalism that's running this country. It's corporate pseudo-fascism.
With a little socialism.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny we're talking about farming because Thomas Jefferson had this vision of the yeoman farmer. That was who was going to be the middle class that made up the American Republic, like in the Roman Republic.
Yeah.
So I concur that we need stuff like this to protect our farmers. Although I am kind of curious what big corporation gave the money for this.
I am against this bill for one reason alone, and that is this bill does not neglect that the government can't take away private property for public use. And there are two reasons that this is bad. Number one, if the state of Texas suddenly comes out tomorrow, Sid Miller, for those who don't know, Commissioner Sid Miller is a family farmer, runs a ranch up here, not too many miles up the road from Johnson County here. Man's been on that land for 50-something years, he said, I think. Now, if Sid Miller, for instance, we'll use him as an example, whether you like him or not. Sid Miller has been farming there for 50 years, 60 years, inherited this land. His family is fourth-generation farmer in the state, is what he had told us at the Lone Star Patriots dinner one time. Well, let's say Sid Miller and his neighbors, all 4 or 5 of them, get told, well, the state needs this land to build a new interstate. All of a sudden, even though this bill says it's to protect Texans' land and their right to farm, the state can still come in and seize private property for public use.
Eminent domain.
Oh, yeah. And so there's no when we really get down to this bill, it's a lot of lingo, but there's really no concise thing that says we are stopping the state from taking private land. So you either get taxed off of it, Mick, or you get told to stop. You get told to get off. The second reason that I'm against this bill is very evident here. It says it does not neglect the power for a state agency to prevent a danger to an animal health or crop production. So let's say, the big controversy going around right now is that wetlands project. Let's say all of the federal government, the EPA, Texas Department of Land, Agriculture, whatever it's called, comes out, and somebody in the Texas Department of Agriculture, somebody gets tipped off, and they get paid off, and says, well, looks like Mr. Miller or whoever's property is now a wetland. Oh my gosh, it's almost like every land in North America was wet at some point, because after Pangea split, you had this big ocean that filled in most of the Great Plains all the way up through Texas. So anybody can say this is a heritage wetland project. All of a sudden, a family gets moved off.
Eminent domain again.
Oh yeah, and they say it's for the prevention of danger to an animal or a crop, but really all they're protecting are a few ragweeds, some itchy algae, and the only non-extinct bison that's left. Like, that's going to make a big difference.
It's funny how this works. They move people who own that land, have worked that land for 4 generations in this case, potentially, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Because there's this rare flower or type of insect, make up whatever, a spotted rabbit. I don't know. I don't care.
It's one away from extinction already anyway.
Yeah.
And
but then they let a corporation buy that land and build a bunch of development houses that none of us can afford and sell it to Chinese investors.
We'll just get the price jacked up on us again.
That doesn't sound like a conspiracy theory to me at all. That sounds like market forces being manipulated by an agency and a corporation.
So,
definition of fascism.
Mick and I want to extend the regard that we want people to share this video around as much as you can, because this is very imminent and very present on us. We're going to go to proposition number 2, or Senate Joint Resolution 64. Proposes a constitutional amendment to allow the governing body of a county or municipality to exempt from property taxation all or part of the appraised value of real property used to operate a child care facility. But we're going to skip down here. The proposed amendment would authorize the governing body to adopt the exemption as a percentage of the appraised property value. That percentage could not be less than 50% of the value. The proposed amendment would allow the legislature to define the term child care facility and to establish additional eligibility requirements to receive the property tax.
So can I give out a summary and tell me if I'm correct here? The government gets to decide what a school or a daycare is based off of their own definition.
And then they get to decide how they divvy out tax exemptions.
It sounds like a great idea with the government we have.
Initially, it does.
Yeah, well, I mean, like the way the state of Texas is now, the government, they could probably step in and stop some of this gender nonsense being spread there.
Yeah.
What happens when one nut job gets in for a term, though, and they completely flip it on its head?
And that's, we've seen that in city government time and time again here locally. We've seen that time and time again on the school boards here. I am pro this bill for one reason. That's because it lowers property tax for these daycare facilities. I'm against this bill 99% because not only does this take away from, let's say, everybody in this county, the majority of us are pro school choice. We are pro deciding whether we want our kids to be homeschooled. Let's say there is a co-op that wants to start up, a very, progressive co-op or very conservative co-op, either way. And these parents have chosen to send their kids here regardless of whether it's religious, whether it's funded by liberals or conservatives, regardless. They made a conscious choice to want to send their kids to this daycare facility, this school, this child care facility, as they call it, which is all the way up until age 17 and a half, These county legislatures can then divvy out and say, well, our county or municipality, our city government, in a sense, does not like the conservative values that your daycare holds. We're not giving you an exemption. Same with the conservative ones. If and I'm sure everybody would be for a liberal co-op coming in and educating these kids purposely because they don't want that ideology being spread in the public schools. So why not take the kids out of public school, reform public school, and send them somewhere where they are being taught the values of their parents?
So hear me out. You pay city property tax.
Yeah.
County property tax. State.
Oh, yeah.
And now they're handing out or could be handing out property tax exemptions and reductions based off of what they define as child care or whatever.
Or what they define as...
It sounds like property tax is being used as or could be used potentially as a hammer against Texans It's as if we have
It's
a
very
government.
politicized.
Yeah, it's as if we have a government that cares only about keeping the people down and taking their money.
And we talk about this, and we talk about. I have another constitutional proposition. Why don't we get rid of property tax, give that money back to the families, and let them let's start up a new way of funding public schools. Even if we cut down property taxes half of what they are, if we could for the people that don't even have kids in the district, I'm not saying that I am for hiking up property taxes just for those that live in the district. If we have a school system that cuts down to 1/10 of what they charge people without having kids in the district, and they go down to half of what they're charging the people that have kids in the district, or whatever, however you want to divvy this out, however the voters want this to be done.
Exemptions for homeschoolers, maybe?
Yeah. And we give that money back to the parents and let them decide how they want to invest that in their kids' education. Optional grants for the schools, where parents who support projects are willing to chip in more of their own money, and let the voters completely decide how they want to fund a project.
So while we're on that topic, independent school districts are qualified as their own district, a specialty district in the state of Texas. They have their own property tax as well.
They have their own appraisers that work with the county. They have their own legal team and everything.
This is a vampire on the American pocketbook.
Yeah.
I think it's time that we get rid of these special districts for schools. They fall under the city, and I think we should merge city and county governments for the most part and have only one single property tax. I don't know if we could get rid of property tax overall.
It would, and I grew up in Arkansas, so it was weird to me when I moved here to Burleson, and for 7 years I was like, so who runs this school district? In Arkansas, we went to a small school that maybe had 500 kids total from grades K through 12.
Just 500 people,
Just 500 people from 2 towns over even. They all got bused to the school.
There were about 1,200 in my graduating class, I believe, just for, comparison.
And so when we moved here, our old school funded the buses, funded the gym, and they didn't have any grants. The school, I don't even know how good of the credit it was, but they didn't hardly have any projects at all. And it took them 50 years to get a new gymnasium built. It took them 50 years to get an FAA or a FFA program built. And so we see nothing in Texas. I've noticed the difference here is there's no financial or fiscal responsibility. When the schools are governed by the city, you see a school spending its money wisely because there's oversight there. When you give a single elected body the right to be independent from every other accountable agency in the city, and these people get on there and they make these choices that say, well, we in our interpretation, maybe not the cities, maybe not the voters, we want a $2 billion grant, or we want a $2 billion bond to build this new gymnasium.
Or was it $20 million for a arena, or what?
The
football field.
I don't even know how much the one in Godly was. It was like
it was over 50. I know that.
I'll say it was an ungodly amount.
Yeah, for a city that size to have that kind of money spent on a stadium, but not I don't know, a public library, or it's something more useful to the overall health of the city. A new infrastructure bill. It's insane. And keep in mind, this is being backed by mortgage or bonds that your great grandchildren will be paying.
Yeah.
Want to move on?
So Proposition 3, the House Joint Resolution 132 proposes a constitutional amendment to prohibit the legislature from imposing a tax based on wealth or the net worth of an individual or family. The proposed amendment would also prohibit the legislature from imposing a tax based on the difference between assets and liabilities of an individual or family. The proposed amendment will appear on the ballot as follows: the constitutional amendment prohibiting the imposition of an individual wealth or net worth tax, including a tax on the difference between assets and liabilities.
So it prohibits a wealth tax.
Yeah, essentially.
I can get behind that.
And, I'm going to say 3 is the only one that I can 100% support here. But, I'm not negating that there is some ulterior motive behind passing this. There are a lot of billionaires that live in Texas. There are a lot of paid off politicians who live in this state that would love to get behind this, because based on however they interpret a wealth tax, I could go out and say, well, my property is part of my assets, don't tax me on this.
Can I say something real quick? They wouldn't pay anyway. They can hire a team of attorneys to get them out of it somehow through some agricultural
loophole or
exemption.
something.
Exactly. It would be the American middle class to pay for it. And another thing, if I'm not mistaken, central bank digital currencies took a major hit. It's being banned in the House right now, or I think they already did it today.
In federal or state?
I believe federal.
Okay.
I might stand corrected on that one, but I think their GOP passed it and they're pushing it through. Feel free to Google that for me. And now we're seeing individual states ban a wealth tax, or at least they're putting it on the ballot to ban it.
It's almost like and I'm proud of this bill, because what we're seeing here is a lot of people in Washington want to tell other people that are out of their district how to live. And it sickens me to my core to see our House officials of New York say, well, I think all Americans can get behind paying a wealth tax because it's time they started paying their fair share. Well, let me tell you something. How about you shut your trap and start paying your fair share to serving this country instead of your own selfish interests, your own financial interests, and putting your pocketbook before the hearts and minds of millions of Americans who don't want communism. They don't want this travesty. They don't want to pay more taxes. And matter of fact, we had Matthew Lucci on here just a few days ago,
and he put it the best
adamantly
way.
Against property tax.
And he said a few magic words in a specific order. It's our money.
Yeah.
And we're tired of you spending it and places on the map we can't even find anymore because our schools are so underfunded.
These people like AOC and all these people are seen as heroes in their district. But I want to ask the people of New York, are you really better off now than you were 50 years ago? We all hear those stories from our grandparents. Back in my day, I built the house that we lived in, and I hauled that toilet up the flight of stairs and put it in myself. And look, my grandpa put in the plumbing for an entire church. That whole community, when they started Harvey's Chapel Church, they got masons together, they got electricians together, they got plumbers together. My grandpa did all of the plumbing in that church. There's like 60 bathrooms in that place.
So they created it and they owned it by the community.
And so when we look at these people were able to bring their skills together and do something. They didn't have to pay nobody. They didn't have to pay inflation. They didn't have to pay tax. They didn't have to pay for the materials because the people did it themselves, and it was twice as cheap as anything else. I can get behind a service corps in this country where we give unemployed people a skill for 4 years, similar to what you would at a trade school or the military. Have a service corps in this country, and let's give back.
What about the labor corps under FDR?
And, there's a lot of things that FDR did that I don't agree with, but the civilian conservation corps and all this were brilliant ideas. We had Americans that learned valuable skills. They were able to take them to the private market whenever they wanted to leave, and it put people to work. And our grandparents gained valuable skills out of those programs. But when we see people proposing, these taxes where the government now selects who they want to succeed, they select who they want to move up the chain, it almost seems to me like we are orchestrating a new proletariat. We are orchestrating, and we have special interests. Don't get me wrong, we have special interests in our state legislature that would love nothing more than to get along with these bills because they get something out of it and we don't. So let's move on to Proposition 4, House Joint Resolution 2 for the second special session. Proposes a constitutional amendment to modify certain provisions of the Constitution related to property tax. The proposed amendment would authorize the legislature to temporarily limit the maximum appraised value of real property for property tax purposes in a tax year. The proposed amendment also would increase the mandatory homestead exemption for school district property taxation from $40,000 to $100,000. The proposed amendment would require the legislature to blah, blah, blah. It goes on. We're going to skip down. The proposed amendment would further authorize the legislature to provide that members serving on an appraisal board with a population of at least 75,000 serve terms not to exceed 4 years. I want to tell you why I'm against this bill. This
I phased out
amendment
while you were reading.
Essentially, I'm just going to read through some of my favorite lines that I just cherry picked out of here. The proposed amendment would authorize the legislature to temporarily limit the maximum appraised value in a tax year. So we're not getting rid of your property taxes. We're just temporarily lowering them. We covered this last week in a local property tax episode. We spent a good hour discussing
this. It's on YouTube if you want to watch it.
It's all on YouTube, Facebook, Spreaker. You can go on any three of those and go back through the archives and look at it. It's from last week. I don't remember the exact date. I'm not a whiz when it comes to remembering the 22nd from the whatever. But what we're looking at here is we're not going to lower your property value. We're just going to cap it where it is. So families that complain about $40,000 a year in property tax, $4,000 a year, $2,000 a year, if you rent a house or whatever, those people are still going to keep paying that. The state is not going to lower it. It's just going to cap it where it is for a certain amount of time. So you decide whether you want your legislature in the state house to actually get rid of property taxes, put forth even if it's a 10-year plan. You might not live that long if you're 80 years old, but I guarantee your grandkids, your great-grandkids, your great-great-grandkids, and all of your posterity will thank you for, instead of voting for this slop, putting forth the bill that actually relieves the burden of property tax. Stay with us. We'll be right back discussing the proposed constitutional amendments for the state of Texas.
If you're paying tax on something you own, do you really own it?
Let's be honest. Wheelchairs are heavy, bulky, and ugly. If you carry a wheelchair in your car to take care of a loved one, you know how hard it is getting that clunky, old-style wheelchair in and out of your car. Introducing the Feather Chair Wheelchair. At 13 pounds, it's the world's lightest wheelchair. It folds in seconds and fits neatly in your trunk, backseat, or closet, so you can take it everywhere. And it's only available right here. Order yours today and get a free wheelchair case, a $50 value, yours free. The Feather Chair. The world's lightest wheelchair is just $4.99 with easy payments as low as $16 a month. Sorry, no Medicare or insurance accepted. So call right now to order yours.
800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. 800-823-5826. That's 800-823-5826.
Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. Fast Track Student Loans can get your student loans out of default, stop any wage garnishments, stop collection calls, and stop seizure of your tax refund. Give yourself a break. Stop the stress and get your student loan payments down to as little as $25 a month based on what you can afford to pay. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395. 800-709-4395.
You're listening to Joco Community Radio.
Good afternoon, Johnson County. Welcome back to Let Freedom Ring on this beautiful, beautiful Thursday. We thank God for it, and we're praying for some more cool weather ahead. First of all, we'd like to say Joco Community Radio is proud to be the voice of Johnson County, Texas, and is live 24/7 on the TuneIn Radio Network. TuneInJoco.com is the place to find all the best ways to listen and watch. The station app is also available for free on both Android and Apple devices. Simply search your store or check out our lineup and more at jococommunityradio.com. This episode and more brought to you by Next Level Claims, making your insurance work for you. Reach out to your local Texas sales rep at 844-839-4245. That's 844-839-4245. Be sure to dress your arms and worthatiffy.com. I'd also like to take a second to give a shout out to the Burleson HTO. The blueberry green tea gets better every time I go back. Even though I sample the raspberry, I always go for the classic. So if you're listening, HTO partnership. So we decided we're going to end on the school tax amendment amendment number 4 was what they're proposing. I'm going to give a few more critiques to our lobbyists that we call our elected officials. And then we're going to jump right into why Reuters is not fact checking. So we ended off, the proposed amendment would also increase the mandatory homestead exemption for school district property taxes from $40,000 to $100,000. The proposed amendment would require the legislature for a reduction in the amount of the limitation on school board property tax imposed by the resident homestead of the elderly or disabled. So here's a second reason I oppose this. No elderly person, I can't speak for the other half labeled in this bill, but I don't know anybody that's elderly that their children are still old enough to be in a high school. So if you're elderly and you're listening to this, I'm not against you. I'm against property tax as much as the next guy. I don't think we need to be paying rent to our government for a property that we should own in this country. And if we are putting the American dream, the emblemization of this, the physical manifestation of the American dream is to own a home and have a family, have a nice wife that cooks dinner when you get home. If you're on the other half, have a nice husband who comes home, kisses you on the cheek, and asks you how your day was. None of this will happen if we continue to let property tax drive the youth and the younger generations out of our home, even Gen X and millennials. So
I brought this up at the end of the last segment.
Yeah.
If you're paying a tax for something you supposedly own, do you really own it?
Well, that's what sales tax is. You're selling it to me, then I own it. I don't have to pay anything for it.
Property tax sounds like a subscription fee.
Yeah.
But for something I'm supposedly owning, just chew on that for a minute if you have a second.
So if we look at this bill, not only are those older than 65, so the majority of the Texas legislature, the county legislatures, the city legislatures, in this case, the Burleson City Council, who the majority of them on there are either well off or older than 65, and therefore they can count for all of this. So their property tax will go down while you younger folks, even you elders that that are 55, that get your whatever percent off at Chick-fil-A or McDonald's, the only place that you can afford to eat, you don't even get a senior citizen discount anymore. Do you really want people that are 10 years older than you getting any taxes off when you're not getting anything? But if we're comparing this, let's compare what each of the voters get out of this bill. People that are in the legislature, people that are well off, get property tax exemptions. They get them raised. So they are getting a block of cheddar. Now, those who are younger, have kids in the district, and in this case are getting the temporary exemptions. The people that are actually, trying to get something out of this bill are getting the one little shred of mozzarella cheese. So if anybody has that shredded cheese at home, go to your fridge right now, take out one single shred of cheese, and then take out that big block. That big block is what your politicians and your local governments are going to get out of this proposition, and you're going to get the other one. So think about that for a second before you go to vote for this bill. It sounds good, but it's actually benefiting the upper echelon.
Well, of course, it's rules for thee, not for me.
Yeah,
that's what a lot of
classic
these
communist mindset.
No, not even communist. No, it's elitist.
Yeah,
this very same elitist we overthrew in the colonies to have our own country.
And our founding fathers didn't pay but what, like half of a percent of a tax on some tea, and we threw it all into Boston Harbor, and now
we're being taxed out of our homes.
We can't even afford to live in this country anymore.
We talked about it last week here in Burleson, the property hike tax. Tax hike. Americans can't already afford to buy a home.
Yeah.
If you're under the age of 60, you most likely cannot buy. Then the state does this on top of that.
It's like stabbing a knife in a gunshot wound.
Yeah.
And then twisting it around.
You're really trying to bury the American dream. It's not even unintentional. This is a calculated assault on the American dream.
So let's switch over. I know, Mick, you were really excited to get into this next topic. It's a shame we don't have Matthew here to give his input. He'd been to the border.
Yeah, Mr. Lucci.
Matthew Lucci, I just want to say this, and, it might sound like we're some sort of advertising station, but the guy really is smart. And when he comes in here, he discusses all the stuff with us. He is, 3-0 at visiting the border compared to Kamala Harris.
Or Roger Williams.
He is
elitist establishment.
He's like 3-0 on Joe Biden, who's never visited the border.
Okay, in all fairness, there he probably thinks it's 1940 something and doesn't think it's an issue.
He's probably the only reason he would send the military down to the southern border. If I were Joe Biden, if I were in his shoes and thinking the way he does, he would probably only send the military down there to take out Pancho Villa. Come to find out, it's not 1918 anymore. And Dwight Eisenhower is not going to go to the southern border and say, well, we took out Pancho Villa and his forces now. We didn't even have a wall then. We didn't have illegal immigration.
Biden's been trying to get a hold of Patton on the Telegram for a whole year now.
Dwight Eisenhower deported, 8 million illegals in the whole decade of the 1950s. We have that many coming in here every day. And we're going to get into why this is a travesty.
I'll let you go through the article.
I went off on the Guardian. Sean remembers, or Mick remembers this. We went off on the Guardian when we talked about the human trafficking in this country. I said, look, I'm not saying the Guardian is pro-trafficking, but it's kind of giving away some big hints. Now, I'm not saying Reuters is full of intelligent people that actually do their fact-checking, but you can kind of get a hint from the title of these articles, man.
I'll just go through it, then we'll.
So this is a CNN article, and I don't trust the Comrade News Network, Red Square. You kind of get the gist.
Clinton News Network.
I don't trust it as much as the Next Soul, but they put out an actually good article here in July of 2022. Imagine that. It was not. I haven't seen the word Trump come up once yet. You might fact check me on that, but it says ICE is developing new ID cards for migrants amid growing arrivals at the border. Now, we already saw this with New York allowing, I think it was about 2 million unregistered migrants in New York. They just gave them voter registration. They sign them up, let them vote in local state elections.
That is how a republic dies.
Now, we saw this with I don't even know what they were called. The guys that invaded the Roman Empire.
The Germans?
It was the people from the territories that they ruled over that were essentially the class that couldn't vote. And then they went in and
the Germans.
Yeah. It was them and a few other people like the
Huns.
From Egypt and all these other places.
No, it was the Germans and the Huns. That's what destroyed Rome.
Yeah. And so what we're seeing now is a migration of people that do not vote in this country, should not vote, because I'm not saying that all these guys are bad. Some of them do come here for good purposes. But we're seeing
economic migrants who don't care about the nation as a whole.
What we're seeing is all these people are coming across our border with the intention of displacing our labor, displacing our politics, and displacing our manufacturing.
Not to mention, they're also displacing our culture.
Oh, yeah.
Our language, our lineage is Anglo-Celtic people from the United Kingdom who have these great traditions that hail from Old England, like the right to a jury. When the people of a nation change, the nation changes.
Yeah. And so not only the Biden administration was when this article came out. ICE, mind you, was under Biden when this article was published. Instead of getting them out and getting 6 million of them out, just like Eisenhower did, deporting 6 to 8 million illegal migrants throughout the decade of the 50s with only a few thousand guys, mind you, the guy knew what he was doing. So they know where these guys live. They know where these illegals live because CNN says they're sending them ID cards. What do you expect them to do with that when they put in these new voter ID laws? The Biden administration is just going to come out right at the end before this next November election, say everybody has to send in a copy of their ID, and this mail-in ballot. They're getting ready to roll that out again. Stay in your homes. We're doing a climate lockdown or a whatever have you lockdown. Just don't leave your house. We'll send the ballot to you. And so all these illegals are going to look like legal citizens when they put a picture of an ID in there. Nobody's going to check it, and you're going to get Biden-Harris for another 8 years.
Not to sound like a drama queen, but this is how a republic dies.
Yeah.
This is no joke.
And so we come to the present. Now, the CNN one was published July 22nd. So there was a big, what Reuters apparently thought was a conspiracy theory behind this. Reuters fact check doesn't even put the guy's name on here. He doesn't have the guts. As Boris Johnson would say, he doesn't have the guts to put questions to me. So what we're seeing here is Reuters comes out and publishes this a month later, not even a month. Fact check. No evidence. Newly proposed ICE secured docket card program would allow undocumented migrants to vote fraudulently. So Reuters, and look, I might sound a little sarcastic saying this. I think we should just give the entire control of our federal government over to Reuters. With everything they publish, with the climate, with all these agendas, with all of these migrant crises, all these wonderful fact-checking reports that they put out, Reuters apparently has access to every single document, every single picture, every single thing that could possibly be leaked. Reuters has access to it.
They're omnipotent.
They are omniscient. They are like the divine incarnation of the federal government. These guys know their stuff, man. And by that I mean they don't know jack squat. These guys come out and say there's nothing here, there's nothing here, there's nothing here. CNN sure as heck thinks there does. And you're telling me that they're now fact checking fake news? Who wastes their time fact checking something that's fake? So Reuters apparently runs the federal government. They have access to everything. And oh, look here, let's look at all of the stuff that they cite in this article. USA.gov, who can vote? Well, no crap. You go on there, it's a legal citizen, but that doesn't mean that's what's going to be the case here in the next 10 years. The verdict, no evidence. The first two words. Now let's see what comes out in a Fox News article today at 5:50 this morning Eastern time. Leaked images show Biden administration's planned ICE ID card for illegal immigrants. Biden administration gearing up to give photo IDs to illegal border crossers who are released in the United States. If you don't have a permanent residence here, if you are not a legal citizen, you should not be allowed to vote in this country. And I'm not saying that as a Democrat. I'm not saying that as a Republican. I'm not saying that as a liberal conservative. I wouldn't even say that if I were a communist, because communists know better than to let people into their own country who are not like them.
Yeah, the Soviet Union had the Iron Curtain.
Yeah,
literally.
That's why Stalin, if you look at his immigration programs, look at that. What Stalin did was brilliant. He sent millions of Russian citizens. He paid for their removal. And I don't say it was forced, but he sent millions of Russian citizens to Eastern Europe. He paid for them to settle in the Soviet bloc. That's why the majority of Eastern Ukraine right now is voting 75% to stay with Russia.
They're ethnic Russian.
In Donetsk, Luhansk.
They pushed out the peoples that were living there earlier, or they reconnected the Russian groups that are already there.
And so those people hold a 75% ethnic majority because after 80 years...
Well, it was going on since the Russian Empire. The point remains the same, though. If you have a mass group of people that are distinctly different from you coming into your country, you lose your country.
So we have to wonder if the Soviet Union... And I'm not saying Russia is communist or anything like that, but the point still stands. We have to wonder what country, what group, what world organization is sending these people into the borders so that these people can hold power. And, I'm going to show the camera. I'm going to show you what pictures were released. I hope you can see that.
Want to read it off?
Sean, I'm going to let you...
World Economic Forum? Is that one of them?
I'm going to let you give your point. I'm going to hold this up to the camera real quick.
So remember what we were saying earlier about if people of your nation change, your nation changes. If I wanted to destabilize an entire civilization, I would flood it with people that do not belong to that civilization, did not create it, do not care about it. These people are not British and Irish. They're Catholic, I know they're Christian, but they're not Protestant.
Well, they're not even.
They don't believe in the right to jury trial. They don't believe in the principles of Anglo-Saxon common law, the Magna Carta, the Constitution, the right to bear arms, right to a jury, right to free speech, a law and order, as anyone in the West would know it.
Yeah. So what we're seeing,
as more and more of these people come here and settle here as economic migrants, our country is going to become worse and worse.
Yeah.
And it's not a slight towards these people. This isn't a racialist point or something along those lines, or it's not ethnic persecution. It's stating a point. Your countries look this way. Our countries look that way as Anglo-Celtic peoples, as Anglo-Saxons. If all the Anglo-Celtic peoples no longer are a minority in our nations, we lose what we built. By simple fact, we get outvoted 10-1. And there's also something else. There's another purpose here. The corporations want all these migrants to come here out of desperate economic situations.
Cheap labor.
They drive our wages down, push us out completely out of the job market.
In a borderless world, too, you're not going to pay tariffs. You're not going to pay excise taxes or any of that.
Not to mention,
So
they would
save
have
money.
It would be an indentured serving class that would, into eternity,
as the World Economic Forum report says,
they'd be living paycheck to paycheck on.
They will be the next useless class. Anyway,
hey, hang on. What was that again?
Useless class.
Word for word, useless class.
Useless class. We'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
But what we're seeing here, and mind you, Reuters, beautiful group, has access to every single thing. We might as well just give them our Constitution.
Let's just go
and
work for them.
Let them just run this whole place because they seem to know what's going on.
Where's Reuters located?
God, if I know.
Want me to Google it?
Yeah, look it up. They're probably New York based. Anyway, so instead of the Biden administration and whoever they work for finding these people and saying, we know where you live, we're sending the FBI to you to deport you because we don't know if you're criminal or not. That is not a hate crime. That is not something that a country that hates people does. What countries that hate migrants do is make them walk all this way and then live in a country where they are not welcomed by the government, where they are not civically enfranchised, they do not embrace the values and the culture of that country. That is inhumane.
They're distinctly different.
They not only are distinctly different, but they are living in a country where they have no civil rights. So we are disenfranchising them from constitutional rights by forcing them to live here illegally.
On Reuters, they would love to have control over our constitution and government because then we'd be back under Britain. They're in London.
Yeah.
They're in London. They're based in London since 1851.
So that's the report that came out now. So I guarantee you the Reuters people probably figured that out because this came out a year after the Reuters one did and exactly a year and 2 months after the CNN one did. But Reuters knows what's going on.
The goal of the World Economic Forum is to make sure you own nothing and are happy.
So we're going to get into that real quick.
Let me finish saying, if you have no idea who you are, what your language is, what your culture is, what your race is, what your nation is, what your religion is, even, how can you stand up to consumerism and communism?
And it's funny you mentioned communism. I want to leave everybody with a quote while we get into this. Joe McCarthy, as screwball as many people think he was right about more than he was wrong. And I might get a lot of hate when I run for office for saying that, but I will live until my last breath believing that.
I'll back you up on it.
Joe McCarthy had a quote that he said at a Senate subcommittee on investigations hearing. He said, if leaders of countries can be convinced that they are global citizens, it will make it easier for them to betray their own country. So while we have that, the WEF here, the World Economic Fascists here, automation will soon eliminate millions upon millions of jobs while new jobs will be created. It is unclear whether people will be able to learn the skills fast enough. Well, I can tell you who will, the migrants that they're flooding our Western countries with. Those who will fail in the struggle against irrelevance would constitute a new useless class. I wonder who came up with that. It's Karl Marx.
If you think they're going to give you the money to survive, no. These people
they don't care about us.
They're demonic. This is a dual assault by both communism and capitalism against working people.
And then it says here, if as if that wasn't communist enough, people who are useless not from the viewpoint of their friends or family, but useless from the viewpoint of the economic and political system. So the World Economic Forum wants people to be displaced by jobs. They want them to be useless, not to society. They want them to be useless to the government.
The people of a nation are bound to the soil.
Yeah.
They are dependent upon the nation state to give them opportunities and the kind of life they can live. This completely defies that. This is a global order where both they have a communist control, but this fascistic corporate capitalist motivation to extract as much value.
Have you ever heard the term, Mick, planned programming? Basically putting something in somebody's face and years after you do that exact thing. Well, here it says alongside inequality, the other major danger we face is the rise of digital dictatorships that will monitor everyone all the time. It goes down on the list to say a system that understands us better than we understand ourselves, can predict our feelings and decisions, can manipulate our feelings and decisions, and can ultimately make decisions for us. We go on to say...
So hang on, it takes away the free will God gave us.
Yeah. And so then they go on here to say in the not so distant future, similar algorithms might tell us where to work and who to marry, and also decide whether to hire us for a job, whether to give us a loan, and whether the central bank should raise the interest rate. So let me ask you something. Do you want a future that is a caste system like they have in India, where you cannot marry into the upper or lower echelons.
No, it's worse.
Where you are the untouchables.
And it's worse. In India, their caste system is just a tradition. It's not state mandated
Yeah.
like it used to be. This is state mandated by a group of people who actively hate you. They're not indifferent. They actively hate you and me because we're not in the royal family or whatever.
They also have something against intelligent design by God. Finally, technology might disrupt not just our economy and politics, which flooding the migrants in here. Nobody's in the job market anymore. Americans end up displaced, and then you get put on a universal basic income. No.
If we're lucky, we get a universal basic income.
They put a chip in your hand. They monitor you, and then it says, in the coming decades, AI and biotechnology will give us God-like abilities, lowercase God, lowercase G, to re-engineer life and even to recreate completely new life forms. So they were building up the Tasmanian tiger down in Australia.
I've brought this up before. If it wasn't created through the natural process, does it have a soul?
No.
We're talking about human beings who aren't human beings here. This sounds like a demonic perversion of the way
offspring of the Nephilim.
I'm not familiar with that, but I've heard the term.
Basically, when Lucifer and his demons, it says in the Bible, they looked down and lusted after the woman on the earth.
Okay.
So they came down here, and it's biblically in the Bible. You can look it up,
right?
Well, I believe it's the book of Genesis.
Well, no,
Genesis,
book of Enoch
Old Testament.
Right?
It's Old Testament anyway.
I knew it's Old Testament. Book of Enoch talks about this a little, though, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay.
And so it says the Nephilim came down here. The fallen angels came down here and lusted after the women, made whoopee, and then that's where the race of giants came from. That you have that David slayed Goliath. Goliath was the Nephilim. And so we are seeing man building a Tower of Babel,
the World Economic Forum,
the Austrian Parliament, I believe it is. You can look at their Parliament building. Looks exactly like the unfinished.
No, you're talking about Brussels for the EU, I believe.
Something like that, yeah.
It's EU and Brussels. I've heard the same thing.
It says,
like a tower.
Unfortunately, just when global cooperation is needed more than ever, God, yes. Some of the most powerful leaders in countries are now deliberately undermining global cooperation. Leaders like the U.S. president, in quotations, Donald Trump, when this came out, tell us that there is an inherent contradiction between nationalism and globalism. Well, I wonder why, because a nation is not a globe.
We need America first leaders, not world first. I care about America first. I care about the Anglosphere first. The West
our nation is not going to solve this migrant crisis without being America first.
I'm tired of rhinos. I'm tired of Democrats, Marxists, communists, whatever you want to call these people. We need America first leaders.
In the last 2.5 minutes, I'm going to go through my last favorite thing, and I'm going to show you the report here after we get done reading it. Unfortunately, we have gotten so used to this wonderful situation of peace that we take it for granted, and we are therefore becoming extremely careless. I wonder who's in power that's doing that. Instead of doing everything we can to strengthen the fragile global order, not like the UN can't bring you in front of a world grand jury and court-martial you and more than likely throw you in a world jail. They tried to do that with Putin. What's stopping them from doing it with our next Republican or Democrat president?
No one in the BRICS alliance will allow that to happen to Putin. Putin is defying them, essentially.
Instead of doing everything we can to strengthen it, countries neglect it and even undermine it. The global order is now like a house that everybody inhabits and nobody repairs. It can hold on for a few more years. I'm sure it can. You know, Lucifer is going to come down here. The Antichrist will rule for a few thousand years after the rapture. So I think the global order is pretty well set for him to rise up already, if that's the will.
This won't last. This is so unnatural to humanity. No.
We have forgotten what it's like, but believe me, as a historian, I'm sure you know your history. You're quoting Karl Marx an awful lot. He killed, communism killed 150 million people worldwide. But
no, it killed almost 1 billion. It's going to happen in China, Taiwan.
You don't want to be back there. It is far, far worse than you imagine. Yes, our species has evolved in that jungle and lived and prospered there for 1,000 years. I didn't live in a jungle for 1,000 years. I don't know how long ago it is. I'm not one of those people that goes around saying it's 5,000 years old. I marvel at God's creation either way, but I don't believe that I came from a cat. If you look at our cats at our house, we're two different species. And then it goes on to say, but if we return there now with the powerful new technology of the 21st century, our species will probably annihilate itself. What an optimistic view from the world leaders at Davos. And I'm going to let Mick finish us off for the next few seconds. I'm just going to show you this.
This is an assault on human liberty. It's an assault on the West, the principles of the Anglosphere.
Yeah.
I am tired of being ruled by people who hate me.
And so we're going to leave you with this. What kind of world do you want to live in? What kind of state do you want to live in? Ponder those constitutional amendments.
Can I say one last thing?
Yeah.
There's enough for everyone to have a decent middle-class life. The top 1% don't want that. They want to own everything, including your soul.
So ponder the migration crisis. Ponder Yuval Harari's thing. We'll be back Tuesday. God bless you. God bless the United States of America. Thank you.
From Burleson to Venus and Grandview to Godly, this is the voice of Johnson County. Joco Community Radio.
If you're trying to quit drinking or doing too many drugs, listen to me. You don't know me and we'll never meet. I had a problem like you once. I drank and used to party a little too much till it got out of control and almost ruined my life. I realized I needed help to fix my problem before it totally destroyed me. If you've tried to fix your drinking and drug problem and you know you can't do it alone, you need to call the National Treatment Advisors. They'll immerse you into a 30-day program to replace your old habits with new habits and totally change your life. And if you have PPO private health insurance, the entire program may be covered. Fix your problem right now before it gets any worse. Get clean. Call now and learn more. 877-247